Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Okay, everybody. Hello. Happy Saturday. What a week, huh? Another week. What do Donald Trump and Muriel Bowser blew that joke. What do Vladimir Putin and Muriel Bowser have in common? They both cleaned Donald Trump's clock this week. Wow. Trump's epic failure in Alaska, it's going to get a lot of attention. And as much fun as it would be for me to go through all the ways he embarrassed himself and our country, how he gave away things without getting anything in return. I mean, really, he did say, we will not negotiate unless there's a ceasefire. Oops, sorry, gave that away. How he was outmaneuvered and abased and abused by Vladimir Putin on American soil, no less. I know others are going to tell that story. So let me instead focus on something else this afternoon, which is Trump's sinister efforts to erase the First Amendment. And we need to take this seriously. You know, the First Amendment protects the freedoms of religion, assembly, speech, the press, and petition, right? Petition is the right to ask the governments to redress what you think you're doing wrong. And America is unthinkable without it. Unthinkable. And yet, in their lawless effort to gain total control, Donald Trump and his MAGA movement want it gone. The attack is ongoing and it's broad. Look, Trump, his Congress and his Supreme Court are undermining the freedom of religion, right? As they trumpet their own religion, they're undermining the freedom of religion. They're working to impose one strain of Christian nationalism on us all. They move to impose religious texts and objects in elementary school classrooms. Their sect believes that God made America a white Christian and male-controlled nation, and they have imposed that view on the country by purging non-white and female Americans from every position of leadership in the military. It's unheard of. HHS and DHS are busy creating social media memes to downplay the horrors of their ICE deportations and instead turn them into Christian nationalist propaganda. This is it's cruel, but it's also the very kind of religious establishment that our founders feared. Freedom of religion, not for these guys. The right to petition still exists, but it's been transformed into a right to bribe. Remember, Trump recently accepted a gold iPhone or an iPhone stand, whatever it was, from the CEO of Apple, and lo and behold, tariff relief followed. I mean, the Trump family is reportedly nearly $4 billion richer than it was when he entered office. So much for the right to petition your government. It's really just the right to come there and pay homage. No, sorry, pay cash. And Trump, he's even found a way to link his attack on the freedom of religion and his penchant for pocketing other people's cash. In Oklahoma right now, the state superintendent of schools, a guy named Ryan Walters, is demanding that Oklahoma's Supreme Court lift its injunction to allow him to buy Trump Bibles. And yes, there is a Trump-endorsed Bible. And yes, Trump gets money every time it's sold. And he wants to buy that Bible for thousands of public school classrooms. Yeah, impose their idea of religion and take some grift while you're at it. 2 down from the First Amendment. And, of course, the freedom of assembly Trump has attacked since his last term. Remember when he ordered the military to clear Lafayette Park, a peaceful demonstration, so he could hold up a Bible, upside down, by the way, for a photo op. And he's still attacking the freedom of assembly as he deploys the National Guard and federal troops into our cities. And he calls those who protest against his regime thugs and very bad people. And he frequently threatens to use the Insurrection Act to put a stop to all of it. But the crackdown on free speech and the press deserves special attention. Thomas Jefferson thought a free press was the most important defense that people have in a democracy. Benjamin Franklin used the powers of the press to help create that democracy. And Trump and his allies have abused their powers trying to bring it to heel. Just yesterday, a court ruled in a case, this was called Media Matters versus the Federal Trade Commission, and the ruling tells a frightening story. Media Matters is a pro-democracy news organization. Since it was founded in 2003, it's broken important stories and aggressively attacked, disinformation. It's important. Well, its niche in our media ecosystem is the one that drives the right wing the craziest. It investigates and sheds light on the corrupt and interconnected world of right-wing media figures and politicians. So in November of 2023, Media Matters reported, this is something I think you guys all know, they reported that advertisements on X, which Elon Musk had just bought when he bought Twitter and rebranded it to X, that advertisements on X were appearing next to anti-Semitic and pro-Nazi posts all over the platform. Advertisers didn't want to be associated with that, and they fled. Now, instead of promising to fix the problem, what did Elon Musk do? He vowed to file and I'm quoting here, a thermonuclear lawsuit. And he did. He sued Media Matters in courts, not just in the U.S., but all over the world. And Musk's ally, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, urged state attorneys general to sue as well on civil grounds, not criminal grounds. And they did, Missouri and Texas, and they followed up by issuing CIDs. These are, CID stands for Civil Investigative Demands, and it's discovery, it's intrusive discovery. All of this was expensive and time-consuming for Media Matters to defend. So they had to cut back. They lost staff. They even cut back on criticism of the Trump administration and Musk as part of an effort to settle. But Musk didn't want to settle. He wanted them out of business, and he had the money to bleed them to death. And remember, while this case was pending, CBS and ABC caved. They settled frivolous suits by paying large sums to Trump for his library. Litigation as a means of facilitating bribes, I think. CBS even agreed to a government monitor of its news content. A government monitor of CBS News. Wow. This is, of course, absolutely in conflict with the idea of a free press. Now, according to the New York Times, one of Media Matters' donors argued that it was time to just shut down. But Media Matters refused, and they fought on. And they won injunctions against Musk's globally aggressive litigation strategy and against the state's attorney general's CIDs. And that should have been the end of it. Should have been the end of it. But it wasn't the end, because Trump's Federal Trade Commission stepped in to investigate what it alleged was an advertiser boycott illegally led by Media Matters. Can you imagine? They really wanted to put him out of business. Yesterday, a judge ruled, and the opinion is a blockbuster. D.C. Circuit Court Judge Sparkle Suknanan wrote, I'm going to read it to you. It should alarm all Americans when the government retaliates against individuals or organizations for engaging in constitutionally protected debate. And that alarm should ring even louder when the government retaliates against those engaged in news gathering and reporting. The judge is right. The alarms should be ringing. The evidence was unbelievable. It showed that the FTC's chairman, Andrew Ferguson, had it out for Media Matters. He had a vendetta. Even before he was nominated, Ferguson went on Steve Bannon's podcast to argue, get this, that the government needed to crack down on progressives who are fighting disinformation. Imagine that. The government should crack down on those fighting disinformation. And that, it seems, was all it took to get Ferguson the top job at the FTC. The court found that Media Matters, and here I'm going to read it again, engaged in quintessential First Amendment activity when it published an online article criticizing Mr. Musk and X. And the court finds that the FTC's expansive CID is a retaliatory act. A retaliatory act. The case isn't over. This is a preliminary injunction, and you can bet they're going to still come after him. But it laid bare the administration's abuse of power in the service of Trump's desire to destroy the First Amendment's protections of speech and the press. And look, these are the guys who argue all day long that they are all for free speech and against censorship of any kind. It's a lie. And of course, these are the same guys who think Donald Trump didn't embarrass himself and our country when Putin made a fool of him. Again, this time in our country. They're liars. Look, it is no longer reasonable to doubt that Mr. Trump and the MAGA movement are dangerous, that this is a fascist movement bent on destroying our democracy. Right now, they have enormous power, and they abuse that power. And if we care about our freedoms, if we care about them at all, we have to work together to oust them from office. We're going to talk about that and more throughout the next few hours. I'm so glad you're here with me. We're going to take a quick break, and then the fabulous Lisa Graves is going to join me. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, we are back, and also back is Lisa Graves. She is, of course, the author of Without Precedent, How Chief Justice Roberts and His Accomplices Rewrote the Constitution and Dismantled Our Rights. I'm pausing there because, in the years since she's written it, I think accomplices is too polite a word. And she's the founder and executive director of True North Research, a national investigative group that shines a light on dark money in our politics. And she's been on the show a bunch, and she knows a ton. It's really great to have her back. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And we had a lot of conversation about accomplices. I was going to go with Confederates, but we ended up going with accomplices for that subtitle.
Well, right. It's a good subtitle, but, as time goes on, the damage they do. Wow. Hey, Lisa.
Yeah.
Or I should ask Paul this. Lisa, is there a way to turn up the volume?
Yes. Let me see what I can do here. Can you hear me better now? Is that better?
It's still a little faint, and that may be just on my end. Paul, what do you think? All right. If you can hear fine, then we'll be good. All right. So Lisa,
I'll project.
We are in this unprecedented gerrymandering war where the president has directed his allies, notably Texas Governor Abbott, but also Indiana Governor Mike Braun, to disenfranchise as many voters as they have to in order to draw new districts that'll cheat voters out of a chance to have their say in the next election. Democrats, including, people like me who profoundly oppose radical partisan gerrymandering, are, I got to say, eager to respond in kind, and that's just dangerous. Could you tell us, please, how the author of this travesty against democracy, against the very idea of sort of sovereign people and elections, the author is Chief Justice John Roberts?
Well, that's right. This debacle that we're seeing has been made possible directly by John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. He has had an extraordinary hostility to the Voting Rights Act since he was a young man. His first real job in Washington after he finished clerking with William Rehnquist was to go to work for the Reagan administration at the top of the Justice Department, trying to stop measures to protect the Voting Rights Act and overturn a Supreme Court decision that his mentor helped orchestrate, which back then in 1980 tried to decimate a key part of the Voting Rights Act. So this is one of John Roberts' key agenda items that he has accomplished with the other right-wing appointees to the Supreme Court. And he's the author of the decisions that have systematically and basically single-handedly at his instigation dismantled key parts of the Voting Rights Act. And so for decades, federal courts have been overseeing the Voting Rights Act. The voting rights are secured by the 14th and 15th Amendment to the Constitution, in particular, empowering Congress to enact laws to secure those rights, as well as the amendment that gave women the right to vote. But that 14th and 15th Amendment, that's where the Voting Rights Act draws its power from. It says Congress can pass any law necessary to effectuate the voting rights guaranteed there. And so that Voting Rights Act of 1965 was designed to protect people from this systematic effort to deny them the right to vote and to deny them real representation, meaning, well, you could vote, but the vote would be meaningless because you would not be able to have your voice heard through fair representation. And so for decades, federal courts have been examining some of these gerrymandering schemes, these efforts to draw the maps in ways that basically secure to politicians the voters they want, rather than to voters the elected officials they want or need to represent them. And that has included measures not just to protect people from limitations or restrictions on voting rights, but also representation. And so what's at stake here is that about a decade ago, this Supreme Court, the Roberts Court, orchestrated an effort to end the federal oversight role over map drawing, except where there was a racial motivation in that map drawing. At least they said that they were going to preserve that. In that decision, Rucho versus Common Cause, the Roberts Court allowed extreme partisan gerrymandering, which is really an offense to the notion of representation. But then, just 2 years ago, a year ago,
Lisa, hold on.
Yeah,
if we're gonna go through the cases, let me back up. I want to do that, but let me back up a little bit. The Voting Rights Act itself was Congress's attempt. I mean, those post-Civil War amendments to the Constitution supposedly guaranteed equal rights to vote for all Americans. Yep. And we know because of years of Jim Crow, they did not. But those amendments said Congress could make laws to enforce them for the first time.
Yes.
Right? So the Voting Rights Act was 100 years later, Congress's attempt just to enforce the constitutional amendments.
Yes.
Right? And because they weren't self-enforcing, and Americans, particularly in some states in the South, were not abiding by them. So they wrote law to enforce it. And that's the thing that John Roberts is trying to undo, effectively saying we can't enforce the 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, 13th Amendment, just appalling. So let's go through those cases that undid it. And I want to say Citizens United was one of them, because in 2010, it let the right wing buy Congress, which was an important part of this. But let's start with Shelby versus Holder.
Yes. This is one of the most outrageous decisions ever issued by the Roberts Court. This was a case, Shelby versus Holder. Eric Holder was the Attorney General. This is Shelby County in Alabama. This is the heart of the old Confederacy. And this was the case that Roberts used to strike down key provisions of the Voting Rights Act. So what had happened was, as John Roberts was awaiting his confirmation to become the Chief Justice of the United States, Congress was in the process of reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act. These key provisions are, designed to prevent these kind of shenanigans, all sorts of things with the way maps are drawn, the way voting districts are held, where people can vote, all that sort of stuff. Congress in 2006 reauthorized the Voting Rights Act a year ahead of schedule with a massive bipartisan vote for basically the next 25 years. They found that the conditions that required the Voting Rights Act, the kind of maneuvers and efforts to deny the right to vote, were still dominant, still important. And so with an overwhelming bipartisan vote, with only a handful of Southern Republicans voting against it, Congress reauthorized the Voting Rights Act, and George W. Bush signed it into law. But John Roberts was lying in wait for an opportunity to strike it down. And in 2013, he did so. he orchestrated a 5-4 decision in which the court said that Section 4 and Section 5, but basically Section 4, which enables the Justice Department to have oversight over some of these districts that have decades of history of trying to deny people the right to vote, particularly African Americans, the right to vote, that they would have to get pre-clearance before they could change their procedures, change where people vote, because Congress knew. They knew through the detailed factual record the numerous ways in which these Southern politicians had tried to jerry-rig the rules, jerry-rig where and how and when people vote in order to basically secure white domination in those states. And so what Roberts did was take that power away, take away the power of the Justice Department to require the pre-clearance of any changes. That's what that Rucho case did, and it came on the heels just 3 years after Roberts helped orchestrate the Citizens United decision you mentioned, but I'll pause.
Right, that was Shelby Holder, not Rucho. Yes, Shelby Holder.
Oh, yes, that was Shelby. Yes, Shelby Holder. Yes, that's correct.
So this is what's so interesting. This is the case where he said, "Oh, America's not racist anymore. Those days are past. We don't need it anymore." And that's the one that elicited that fabulous comment from Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yeah, just because you're not wet when you're under an umbrella doesn't mean it's not raining.
Yeah, that was a brilliant dissent on her part, and exactly right. It's still raining in America, and Roberts actually tucked that sort of language about how America had changed into an earlier decision in the Austin case, and then resurrected that language as the basis for actually overturning a key part of the Voting Rights Act. And interestingly, those dissenters in that 2006 congressional vote, those Southern dissenters, those white Southerners who opposed the reauthorization, they said that they didn't need a majority in Congress. What they needed was 5 votes on the Supreme Court. So they knew what Roberts was going to do. They knew when they had the chance that this court would overturn this enormously important congressional power, a power, as you point out, Congress and the constitutional amendments expressly give to Congress, not to the court. It gives them that power, and that came on the heels, that Shelby versus Holder case came on the heels of that Citizens United decision, which also was another leg in the stool of Roberts' efforts to kneecap our democracy.
Yeah, and so it took about 4 minutes after Shelby versus Holder and the end of pre-clearance for states to do exactly what he said they would never do.
That's right. In fact, minutes, seconds after that decision was announced, Texas announced that it was going to impose voter ID restrictions to make it harder for Americans to vote.
Yep. Took about 2 seconds. All right. So then we get to Rucho, which you talked about. And Rucho was the one that said the courts were powerless to deal with partisan gerrymandering. And what's interesting, Lisa, and you'll have to help me understand this, They said gerrymandering was bad. Gerrymandering was terrible for the democracy. But the holding was that, and I wrote it down, partisan gerrymandering claims present political questions beyond the reach of the federal courts.
Yeah, this was, they used an invented doctrine, the political question doctrine. It's not in the Constitution. They used that theory basically to duck, but it wasn't just ducking, because that implies sort of a passive component. In fact, they used that as a sword to cut down the ability of other federal courts to adjudicate whether a map was fair. And there are longstanding bases for assessing whether a map is fair. Does it secure, fair representation? Is it proportionate? Are the people who are voting together actually near each other, or is the district drawn like fingers coming around a city to kind of scoop up or carve out? Yeah, it's not complicated. And in fact, there are standards under this notion of justiciability.
The lower courts used them successfully for years.
Yes, and it was Roberts who orchestrated with his 4 other Republican appointees to that court this action to strike down the power of other federal judges to follow longstanding precedents to try to protect the American people from having these politicians, in a way that I consider to be corruptly rewriting the rules to secure themselves re-election and denying real representation in their legislatures, both Congress and in their state legislatures. And so, for example, in Wisconsin and North Carolina, to this day, Democratic politicians can win statewide office, like the governorship or the attorney general position, where there's no map. The legislature can't screw with the map. But in both of those states, there are near supermajorities, significant majorities in both the state legislature and the congressional delegation, because those Republicans in the legislature have drawn the maps, have cracked and packed the voting districts to basically secure themselves re-election, and then they pump up the numbers for a couple Democratic seats, so that those are secure. But in the process, they secure themselves an illegitimate majority in Congress.
Yep.
And
I mean, we made progress in Wisconsin, and we're good, but there's more to be done. So this decision was interesting. It drove me back to the Federalist Papers, and God forgive me for doing this. But let me read you a line from, Hamilton in Federal 78, because keep in mind that what John Roberts said is this is really bad for the democracy. It's probably not constitutional, but there's nothing we can do about it. Right? That was his decision in Rucho. This is what the Federal 78 says. There is no position which depends on clearer principles than that every act of a delegated authority, contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it is exercised, is void. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. That's the job of the Supreme Court. To decide if something is against the Constitution and make it invalid. And John Roberts said, oops, we don't have the power to do that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, what's happened is there's a lot of wisdom in those Federalist Papers by the men, including Alexander Hamilton, who were urging the adoption of this new Constitution, back, over 200 years ago. But the name, the Federalists, has been co-opted by this, corrupt effort, in my view, morally bankrupt effort to capture the courts and distort our law through the Federalist Society. But in this instance, that's exactly right. It is the job of the court to help protect people's rights against the excesses of a majority rule. That's what the Bill of Rights, for example, is all about, is making sure that just because you have a majority doesn't mean you can transgress other people's rights. And the other part of that I think really goes unmentioned is with this redistricting, these efforts to deny people fair representation doesn't just make it harder for people to have their voices heard. It is driving extremism, because it means that those Republicans in those districts, they don't answer to the middle, to the independent, to a moderate. They don't have to appeal to them in order to win. The only thing they have to do is avoid a far right, further right challenger, a Trumpster challenger, or an Elon Musk-backed challenger, and it is dragging the country and politics farther and farther to the right. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. But, in reality, the only people they have to answer to are the map makers and the money. People don't count at all. So we've talked about Citizens United, Shelby versus Holder, Rucho. Then there was the Brnovich case, which was jujitsu. It said, we said racial gerrymandering is still illegal, but what if racial gerrymandering is indistinguishable from political gerrymandering? In other words, if it politically makes a difference, then it's okay to do it.
Well, that's right. That's what Brnovich suggested. And then ultimately in the South Carolina NAACP case that was issued last year, the court sort of put the nail in the coffin and said, even though they held out the notion that that racial gerrymandering would be illegal, as long as it's done for partisan purposes, it's okay. And in that case, the lower courts, a 3-judge panel lower court, had found substantial evidence of racial motivation. This was where the South Carolina legislature bleached out the district that had been a longstanding first district there in South Carolina. It was recarved to basically give a safe seat to Nancy Mace, and it moved with surgical precision more than 20,000 black voters out of that district and into a district that has been traditionally in recent years won by a black legislator. So it basically moved blacks out of a district at a proportion that would be impossible other than on a racial basis. That's basically what the lower court found. And the Roberts court, with Alito writing the decision, at Roberts' behest, allowed that to go forward, allowed that district that was in plain violation of the Voting Rights Act, plain violation of longstanding law. Even with the Brnovich decision, there was still some hope that some had that the court would not go that far with that kind of proof of a racial component. a racial motivation, but instead the court said, as long as you're doing it for partisan reasons, it's all right, which is what literally has empowered this outrageous mid-game effort by Texas to rewrite its maps at the behest of Donald
for
Trump.
solely partisan purposes.
For solely partisan purposes, because he knows he's losing. He knows the American people are against him. His buddies over there, like Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, know that these are losing issues that this White House is staking out. It's harming people. It's harming people on Medicaid. It's harming people who want their kids to go to good public schools. It's harming us in numerous ways, and they're trying to shield themselves and him from accountability by cooking the maps, changing the rules of the game mid-election, basically, in order to win at any cost and deny people a chance to hold these politicians accountable.
Yeah.
And the whole essence of a democracy in terms of representative voting is you get to hold the people who are supposed to represent you accountable if they fail you, if they're loyal to someone else or something else besides you. And they're trying to deny that most fundamental component of our democracy. And as you point out, Democrats are not going silently into this. They're not going to unilaterally disarm. They're not going to just defer to whatever Texas and these other Republican-controlled states want to do, because we have a vital need for accountability and for a firewall in Congress against this extremism that is now running rampant.
Okay, everybody, listen, I know that was long and it was a dive into court cases, but I think it's important that you understand the arc that includes Citizens United, but particularly the voting rights cases, Shelby versus Holder, Rucho, Brnovich, and the South Carolina NAACP case, because taken together, they have made it impossible for us to do the thing that we promised in a constitutional amendment after the Civil War, which is to create equality for voters in America. And politicians are trying to take advantage of that. And if they do, we will no longer have our democracy. And Lisa I couldn't find anybody better in the world to talk about that history with. So that's what this Texas nonsense is about. And folks, listen, reminder, in Joe Biden's first term, we came very close to putting an end to this. We passed the law that would have made this kind of gerrymandering illegal, that would have put back some controls on political spending. And I believe it would have been very hard for the Supreme Court to undo it. But we couldn't past the House, couldn't break the filibuster in the Senate. Senators Manchin and Sinema on our side, and they now became independents, and all of the Republicans, all of them, filibustered it so it couldn't pass.
That Act 1 and the John Lewis Act were and remain vital to restoring our democracy. And we were so close, but that filibuster, with the unanimous opposition of the Republicans, along with a couple of wayward, not really Democratic senators, people who have had their own corruption and other issues that are pretty manifest and, in my view, really revolting, stood in the way.
We need to get it passed, Lisa. We need to do it. Yeah. We need to do it as soon as we get power back.
Yes.
All
absolutely.
right, let's go from the Texas gerrymander disaster, which I think we've put in good perspective for people, to this. When Joe Biden was president, Roberts and his crowd, they worked overtime to limit executive authority. Yeah. They limited the executive's branch to regulate businesses. Yeah. Right? I mean, what was the Chevron case? They created a new doctrine saying major questions in America need to be considered and decided by, get this, Congress. Yeah. Fast forward to this Trump term, and the same court can't give this Trump administration power fast enough. So I guess I want to ask you about two things. They say, and they have said a couple of times, that what the president is doing, what Donald Trump is doing, might be illegal. They'll figure that out later, but that they are powerless to stop him, at least for now. And this is the limitation on injunctions and the repeated use of, technical rather than merits-based arguments to delay making decisions on the merits, the lifting of stays, and the taking of their sweet time to get to the underlying questions. What do you make of that?
Well, to me, it's a sign of how corrupted the Roberts Court is. This is just plain political action by this court, acting like politicians in robes, acting like their own little super legislature, where, as you point out, they repeatedly struck down efforts by Joe Biden, for example, to even give modest student debt relief. That was somehow a radical act that no president could do, despite the congressional language that decision was predicated on. This Roberts Court intervened over and over to block Joe Biden's signature policies. But as soon as Donald Trump became president, and they helped pave the way for his return through that abomination of a counter-constitutional, anti-constitutional ruling giving him unprecedented immunity from criminal prosecution, they weren't done. They weren't done once they did that. Once he got into power, this court has overturned more than 17 injunctions by lower court judges. Those lower courts were applying the long-standing law of the United States to protect the interests of the American people, to protect, statutes, regulations, rules, contracts. Those lower court decisions were well-founded on for those injunctions. Kind of, is there a substantial likelihood of success on the merits? Yes. Is there irreparable harm? Yes. Those injunctions were valid injunctions. What this Supreme Court has done, what Roberts has done, and his fellow Republican appointees, is turn the injunction standard on its head. The injunction standard is designed to prevent new sort of radical or dramatic actions from harming people unless and until that new proposal is overseen in court to be constitutional, to be consistent with statute or regulation or a bargained contract, for example. And instead, what this Supreme Court has done is reversed that. Reversed not just those decisions, but basically reversed the standard. They've allowed harmful actions that are causing irreparable harm to veterans, to scientists, to scientific agendas that have been funded to protect the public health, on and on and on and on. They are allowing those actions to go forward while the litigation over the ultimate merits of those edicts is decided by the courts, which is basically allowing irreparable harm every single day, unless and until the lower court ultimately rules, after the full pleadings are done, that those matters are beyond the power of the president. So this is a reversal not just of those individual rulings, but of the ordinary standards of law for an injunction. And they've done so to put their thumb on the scale on the side of Donald Trump in a number of very extreme actions by the president, unilateral actions that did not involve Congress, were in basically violation of laws passed by Congress, budgets passed by Congress, measures for civil servants passed by Congress over and over. But John Roberts is at root a politician devoted to his political party at any cost.
Yeah, this is the same thing with voting rights. Look, gerrymandering might be illegal, but there's nothing we can do about it. Donald Trump might be breaking all kinds of laws when it comes to his leadership of the executive branch. But you know what? We'll consider whether he is later. Meantime, there's nothing we can do to stop him. And that is unconscionable and corrupt. So that's that part of it. Then there's the repeated use of the emergency doctrine to respond to, let me use their words, major questions themselves rather than have Congress do it, sometimes radically reshaping constitutional law without so much as a briefing or even bothering to explain their reasoning to America. Lisa, if I were a constitutional lawyer trying to do my job in America, I would be much more confused now than I was a few months ago, because they are making a hash of the Constitution and the law and not explaining their judgments to us. So we don't know what is and isn't constitutional right now. It's fundamentally undermining the idea of rule of law in America.
I couldn't agree with you more. It is an assault on the rule of law, on the long-standing notion of the rule of law, and it's being conducted by a court, by the highest court in the land, a court that was, really constructed in illegitimate ways through the theft of seats. The seat that was open during Barack Obama's term, the seat that was open right before the election when Biden won that election. And this illegitimately constructed court is now acting in additionally illegitimate ways. It's used a longstanding practice of allowing what's known as the shadow docket to issue rulings, without the full oral argument, without the public seeing the full set of arguments. But it's doing so not just to affirm longstanding law, but to rewrite, in essence, overturn the decisions of lower courts that are based on longstanding law. And as you point out, without even the courtesy of an explanation. Now, I would probably consider their explanations to be deeply flawed had they given them, but the hubris, the arrogance of this court to be using that shadow docket to rewrite our rights without even deigning to give a rationale for those rulings is supremely arrogant. And the dissents to some of those rulings by the Democratic appointees to the court have been really compelling in terms of describing the threat that our nation is facing from the lawlessness by this president, accompanied by the endorsement of this 6-person Republican appointed coterie or clique on the U.S. Supreme Court. And John Roberts, a few years ago, actually, I think it was probably 2007, he gave an interview, I think it was on C-SPAN, and he basically said back then in an interview that was very little noticed that he is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and if people don't like the decisions, he says it's pretty much too bad. That was his language. That was after he sort of seared himself into people's retinas as the guy who was supposedly going to be a fair umpire just calling balls and strikes. He's never been a fair umpire calling balls and strikes. He has systematically now, since he was confirmed almost 20 years ago, put his thumb on the scale of justice for the right wing agenda in almost every case, not every, but almost every case. And certainly in the last few years since the Trump appointees got there, it's been accelerating, and he has been at the helm of that, especially right now this year, with these decisions that are really assaulting the rule of law in ways that make us diverge between justice and law.
So about those dissents in these cases, I'm glad you raised that. I've elsewhere described them as the equivalent in our time to the Declaration of Independence in that time. And I urge everyone to read them. They aren't written for constitutional lawyers. They're written for Americans as they argue about what a court should be and what our freedoms are. Very, very important.
Yes, though I join you in urging people to read those dissents by Justice Sotomayor, by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, by Elena Kagan. They are compelling, and they are basically calling out to the American people to get beyond, what the headlines are in some of the way these cases get covered in the press, to really understand the stakes, what is happening behind the scenes with this court and its efforts to manipulate and revise the law in ways that are supremely illegitimate. Their dissents, should be widely circulated and really are, in some ways, I sort of hate to say it, but they're in alignment with the way some judges in other countries have responded to rising authoritarianism in their midst. For example, in Poland and other countries, where judges were on the front line saying this is not, these actions are not consistent with a civil society, with a democratic society that is supposed to respect and honor people's rights. So these are brave dissents, and they're worth reading.
Lisa, John Roberts has solicited, and they now have another voting rights case coming before them. Yeah. What do you know about that?
Well, we've been concerned. So the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act remains on the books. That's a provision that's designed to make sure that people who are Black Americans predominantly have a chance for fair representation. Section 2 has been part of that landmark civil rights law since 1965. The court back in that Shelby County case left Section 2 alone, but Section 2 is the very provision that John Roberts went to work trying to limit back in 1981 and 82. That was his basically his hobby horse, was attacking the core enforcement provisions of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which do not require intent, which allow courts to look at the effect of the way a map is drawn to determine whether it's constitutional, not just whether you could prove that one legislator made a racist statement, offhand or, on camera. And so the effect standard is what's at stake. And if they get rid of the effects standard, which is what John Roberts was trying to do back in 81, 82 on behalf or consistent with his mentor, William Rehnquist, who had a long-standing history of opposition to the Voting Rights Act. That will kill, for all intents and purposes, what remains of the Voting Rights Act. And so taking this case means they have 4 votes, possibly 5 votes, to overturn the precedent, decades of precedent in this area. And I'm very concerned that this extreme and out of control Roberts Court will do just that.
So, we've spent more than a half hour talking about these cases and this court. You and I share this view that the court's legitimacy is been mortgaged to its partisanship. But it's really important in this time in particular, but in all times, not to just rip down institutions, important institutions in America that have been put there to preserve our democracy, and the Supreme Court is one. It is, on the other hand, equally important to let people know and to fight when these institutions are corrupted beyond recognition. How do you tell people who say to you, "Oh, Lisa, you're just ripping down these institutions that we need"? And I hear it from people too. And I'm trying to say, no, I'm trying to save them from the corruption that has tainted them. How do you address that?
Well, we have a court that has been illegitimately constructed the way the appointments process has occurred. Never before in American history have we had so much money gone into securing, dark money really, gone into securing a majority on the Supreme Court, and that majority not having any of the judicial sort of deference or modesty to not just do the partisan thing. And in fact, we have this majority leaning into the most partisan rulings that have been issued at least in a century, if not longer, by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is an important institution, but when it is acting in a way that is corrupt, when it has justices who have behaved in ways that are corrupt themselves, like Justice Thomas, we have a very serious problem that must be addressed. If this court is not reformed at the next opportunity, when there is a willing Congress and a willing president to put, basic, reasonable rules in place on ethics and on other issues for this court, this Roberts Court will rule over us for the next 20 or 30 years, for a generation or two, systematically dismantling our rights. That is intolerable in a democracy. It's intolerable in a democracy in which we have rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution, as well as rights that have been created and vested in by Congress, and by executive branch agencies that have sought to implement those rights to help us secure clean air, clean water, better schools, healthy neighborhoods, health care that helps us thrive and survive. And so this court is on a path of destruction. We have a moral obligation to fix it, to reform it. If we give in, if we refuse to act, this court will continue to act in ways that are corrupting and distorting our laws and our rights, limiting our rights, and that really denies us our sovereignty as a free people. So I think we have a moral obligation to engage in an effort to reform this court and reform the law, to restore our rights, and to discard the kind of corruption and distortion that some very rich interests have orchestrated through this Supreme Court.
That is a very good answer. Thank you for that. I would have added one more part, which is that this court is failing to protect the judicial branch.
Yes.
That American judges are being threatened with violence. That one had her son murdered. This court will not. That John Roberts will not move to protect them. Is a sign that it isn't about jurisprudence. On the contrary, you and I in this talk of, which is, we're modestly critical of the Supreme Court and of John Roberts in particular. but we don't say it shouldn't exist. And we don't say it would be okay to go violently attack them. You're talking about reform through law when we have a chance.
Yes.
John Roberts won't even stand up to protect in a legal way his own the judges that are make up the federal judiciary.
Well, it's really astonishing because while there is funding allocated for personal security, for judges, the fact is that we need to have some reforms in that area too to provide more robust protection for judges. But at root, part of what John Roberts is doing is he's signaling to some subset of the American people that these lower court judges are acting illegitimately and blocking Donald Trump, which echoes the attacks of Donald Trump himself on any court that rules against him. And so Roberts could be standing up to this president. He could be joining with perhaps another member of that Republican set of appointments to say this is too extreme, this is too far, to set limits as they were eager to do for Biden and for Democratic presidents to limit executive power, but instead they are empowering him at every turn, even as he and some of his close followers attack the lower federal courts and have helped fuel anger, I think, toward the lower federal courts, illegitimate anger toward those lower courts. But instead, Roberts seems content to focus on advancing the partisan agenda that he took on very early in his career and has now used the Supreme Court to advance. And on top of that, he has single-handedly stood in the way of any of the ethics reforms for the Supreme Court itself that would also try to prevent some of the corruption that we've seen, and even reforms that would require recusal when they have, conflict of interest or that sort of thing. So John Roberts has been, I think, a real failure as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And part of that is the environment that we see right now for the security of the lower court judges, and the fact that Roberts has not done more to protect them, but not just protect them in terms of, calling for even more security in significant ways that need to be added to, but also in adding to the notion that these lower court rulings that are based on bedrock law are somehow illegitimate because this Supreme Court has disregarded them and overturned them repeatedly in order to aid Donald Trump.
Yep. Well, and we had this whole conversation without talking about Bush v. Gore, which set it off, but that's another day. Yep. So, all right. Yep. So now they're also musing aloud about undoing gay marriage in America. What else can this court do to repress freedom and democracy in the country? A lot, I'm afraid.
Yeah, there really is a lot. And in fact, we see some of the efforts by Leonard Leo, who's the guy who helped orchestrate a lot of this dark money that created this Supreme Court. He has longstanding opposition to gay marriage. This effort to try to impose his religious beliefs or other people's religious beliefs as binding law on the rest of us. But also there's an effort to try to get a federal ruling barring abortion, not just to leave it to the states, but basically to impose on the 14th Amendment a notion of fetal rights from the moment of conception. So that is another thing they're pursuing. There are other measures that the right-wing litigators are pursuing to further expand the requirement that we, the taxpayers, subsidize religious indoctrination through funding religious schools. So there's a lot that the right-wing playbook has on its agenda for this court, and this court has, for the most part, gone along with most of those agenda items so far. So there's a lot of risk we continue to face substantively from this court, even independent of some of the measures that they've been ratifying for Donald Trump.
Lisa, we got about a minute left. If people are interested in digging deeper, if they're interested in understanding more about these issues, or if they're interested in getting involved in the fight for a less corrupt, more jurisprudential court, how do they find you and how do they support your work?
Oh, thank you so much. Well, my book is at withoutprecedent.info, withoutprecedent.info, that's singular. And you can find all the places I am with my work for True North and Court Accountability on Blue Sky, on YouTube, and with Courier News over on Substack. I've got a Substack called Grave Injustice. So you can find me a lot of places out there in the internet, and would love your support and would love folks to share the book, because the book really does tell the story of how we got here, and it provides ideas for reform, the things we're going to have to do in the future to reform this court and restore our rights.
Yeah, it's very good. Although I'm afraid we're going to have to write a new chapter or two.
Yes. Yeah, we should do that together. I would do a column with you.
Oh,
Yeah,
that'd be
just say
fun.
the word.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Lisa, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And we will talk again. These issues aren't going away.
Well, thank you so much for your fantastic questions, your knowledge, and your devotion to the truth and justice, Edwin. It's a joy to be with you. Thank you so much.
Take care. All right, everybody. We're going to take a break for the news. And when we come back, we're going to go to the DNC.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, that's just live radio for you. But the good news is that Michelle Regalado Dietrich has joined me. She is the chair and she founded the DNC Council on Environment and Climate Crisis. But she's much more than that, and we're going to get into that in a second. But first, Michelle, it's nice to meet you.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Can we start with a little bit about you? I mean, you grew up in the fabulous Great Lakes region, my favorite. You started in a small Wisconsin town. You now live in Michigan. You're a union leader, proud UAW. You took on the fracking industry as a county commissioner. How did you get to this place where you combine both environmental leadership and skills as an organizer and a builder of coalitions?
You know, I've always been interested in politics. My parents actually knocked doors and organized for JFK back in the day. So,
Yep.
You know, it comes down from a long tradition there. But I really became energized during the time of Bernie Sanders' first candidacy. And I blame my son, actually. He couldn't drive yet. He wanted me to go to some meeting for someone I really was only vaguely familiar with. And I heard their vision for, you know, the kind of transformative change that I felt that we needed. And for the first time, really heard a presidential candidate taking a very strong stance about the climate crisis, which as a farmer was already beginning to gravely concern me. So, you know, organized for Bernie, was on his staff, and then ran for local office for county commission. And as a county commissioner, I got deeply involved in both environmental but also labor issues, which I see them as deeply intertwined. And they certainly are in my county. So fought for workers' wages to be increased, but also earned the nickname Mouthy Michelle from the fracking industry, something I bear with pride. So fighting on behalf of my constituents against pipelines that were going very close to their homes, that were wrecking farmland that they didn't want and that were not benefiting the community. So yeah, and then I got elected to the DNC, and I took a look around the DNC and said, how can I make a difference here? And there was no entity to address the environment or climate crisis. And so it took a year of organizing and working with a lot of allies on the DNC who had, you know, were deeply committed to this issue as well. This was a team effort, and also worked with outside organizations, you know, Sunrise and Sierra Club, to advocate for this. And we got the Climate Council, it's the full name, because, you know, we love long names in the Democratic Party. It's the DNC Council on the Environment and Climate Crisis. We got it established, and we've taken that work from there. I do remain deeply involved in labor issues. Yeah, I was recently elected vice president of my regional labor federation. And that is, we have delegates from local unions that represent EPA, NOAA, Veterans Administration. So you can imagine these are difficult times.
Very difficult times. Well, that's a great story. And I hear that a lot on people who, you know, had this insight that something wasn't right. And then they heard political people urging real action, and it got them involved and got them to do things. And in your case, got you, you know, to go out and do that really tough thing, which is to go out and run for office. And you got elected, and then you haven't looked back. I love that story.
Thank you. I'm especially proud that we flipped a 3-term red seat, mostly rural red seat, to blue in that election. And I did run partly on environmental and climate issues.
Oh,
So there's first proof in the pudding that it could be done.
Yep. Hey, now you're at the DNC, and the DNC is the Democratic National Committee is a bit of a black box, not just for most Americans, but for most Democrats. And I'm sure you hear this because I hear it too. People are constantly saying, why aren't the Democrats fill in the blank, right? Why aren't the Democrats fill in the blank? Whatever it is, we're not doing it. So can you tell us a little bit, because the Democrats means a lot of things, but to some people, it means the Democratic National Committee. So can you help us understand it better? How does it work? What do you see as its role? And then talk about the council that you chair and its work.
Great question. And that term black box is one that I often use to describe the DNC. So the Democratic National Committee is the main organization of the Democratic Party, and it's a political organization, not a government body. And our main job is to elect Democrats to all levels of government, but especially to the presidency. And there are other Democratic organizations which take primary responsibility for electing people to Congress, the Senate. And the DNC oversees the Democratic presidential primary process. So during presidential election cycles, the DNC sets out the rules for that primary process of awarding delegates and selecting a nominee. And it decides on the debate schedule. You may remember the controversy over having a climate debate or not on the DNC. Back, I guess, boy, time goes quickly. And it represents the interests of the unchosen eventual nominee until a specific nominee is selected by voters. But remembering that it's the states that actually run the elections. So it also coordinates the Democratic Party's platform drafting and approval process every 4 years. And in addition, it's a resource for coordinating strategy and messaging, a way that the party can organize among constituencies and in different locations, provides training, gets resources to places that need them, including, crucially, the state Democratic parties. So, clearly the DNC has a lot of work to do to take back the White House, and we're seeing our new leadership doing that work toward improvement in ways that I find really encouraging, with more funding to the state parties. The funding to red states has doubled, getting the DNC out of DC with more outreach by DNC leaders and staff, investing more in training. So I am very encouraged by all of those changes.
It's a fundraising machine. Its purpose is but it is really that the Democratic Party isn't, I want to say this, I don't know how to say this, and you have to help me. It isn't a thing. It is a coalition. America is too big and too diverse for at least for our party, a big tent party, to be one thing, which is why it's so confusing to people. The Republicans have thrown out all the diversity and all the diversity of thought, and they are one thing. It's easy to understand what they are. Right? And pardon me, forgive me. They are a fascist, anti-democratic power in America. Okay, got it. Perfectly clear. Perfectly clear. And anybody who doesn't buy into that, they've exiled. So they are really clear about who they are. We don't have that luxury because we are from the bottom up, because America is gigantic, and because we want to have all those voices compete, I guess, but not war, but compete to be heard and to find a set of policies and ideas to govern that the people, broadly speaking, support, and it is in their interest, right? So it makes it very hard for Americans to understand what the DNC is. That's sitting inside it. Some days you wonder what it is.
Yes, I do, but I also feel so encouraged when the DNC meets and we come together. You get almost 500 people from, a lot of the people who are elected from their states to the DNC are, called grass tops leaders, organizers, activists, intermingling with people who are party insiders. And there's you'd have people from the Northern Mariana Islands, because they're represented on the DNC, and Puerto Rico and DC and, all of the middle part of the country. And it can also be beautiful is a fraught term right now, but a really good thing where you see interchange of ideas, people being inspired, interacting with people from across the country and coming to understand the challenges and also the opportunities that lie before us.
Mm-hmm. And this current round of the DNC, and it began earlier, but there's more of a commitment now to run races all over the country, to support local parties all over the country, so that Democrats can be asking people, even in the reddest parts of the reddest states, we want your vote, and here's why we think we should have it.
Absolutely. I mentioned the increase in funding to state parties, but the fact is, and this goes to part of what you're talking about being, it's a big tent geographically. There's all kinds of diversity in the party, of opinion, of location, of types of locations, and we have to compete everywhere. Right now, there's an active Democratic Party organization in just over 300 of the 3,244 counties in the U.S. That's less than 10%. So that's tragic. There is in nearly 1,000 of those counties, there is no, as of 9 months ago, there was no Democratic Party presence, not a phone number. So I think that's already shifting with the increased resources. But if we don't show up, we can't win. People need to be heard. So one of the things that we've been doing on the DNC Climate Council, we've just embarked at the beginning of summer on our third national listening tour. And this time we've been focusing on places where Democrats traditionally haven't shown up, especially the National Party. So I just came back recently from rural Oklahoma, and I hear over and over, we've never had anyone from the National Party. People are really eager to be heard. And we learn from this. And listening is only the first step, right? You have to then do something with that and then commit and organize. So the Climate Council, we are building out a network. We call it DEN, affectionately, Democratic Environmental Network. And our goal is to have state and local Democratic Party environmental organizations in all 57 states and territories. And we've already, more than doubled the number there were to begin with. So we're focusing right now on red areas and red states and red districts and areas in blue and purple states. And then this fall, we're pivoting to also include focusing on campuses, because we know from the results last fall that we really need to work on youth outreach, youth turnout, youth persuasion. And again, we need to be there to do that. Mm-hmm. So we're working closely with the Young Democrats, College Democrats, ally youth organizations. But one thing, and I'll just say frankly, I haven't figured this out. I'm thinking a lot about it, but more than 50% of youth ages 18 to 24 aren't in college, and yet that's the bulk of where our organizing is. So thinking hard about how we can also do that outreach.
Yeah, very important. Hey, I'm interested in this. So when you listen, you go out and listening tours. What did you hear in rural Oklahoma about climate? I'm really interested in it as a urban guy. What'd you hear?
Heard lots of concerns about there's an interstate that's being built by a private company, privatization of public effort, and that it's being rammed through rural communities. We've done this. This has happened before, but a lot of concern about that. So a lot of concern about, that was something that surprised me that I didn't know. Heard a lot of concern about toxins in some of the rivers, real failure to regulate that. So it's killing, these rivers have become sterile, sludgy, really awful. I was taken to tour one of them, and it was pretty impressive in a very bad way.
Yeah, horrible.
I also just heard a lot of requests for, please, we're ready to organize and do outreach. A lot of people think that climate messaged correctly is and can be part of a winning strategy in rural areas. And of course, it may have been a biased crowd that came to talk with me, right? But they were talking about clean air, safe water, concerns in Oklahoma about fracking, because they now have earthquakes, which they never did before, and they're directly related to fracking. And greatly, I'm hearing this everywhere, actually, a lot of concern about the build out of data centers, which are, yeah.
That's so interesting. So, I mean, you've just convinced, well, I didn't need to be convinced. You've reminded me why these listening tours are important. You know, I mean, they're really valuable learning that goes on, particularly if you want to turn them into political action.
Exactly. And that's the next step, is you can't just show up once and listen. There has to be a continued commitment. So we're going to be working on establishing our Oklahoma Democratic Party Environmental Council or caucus, and working with the youth organizations in the state on an ongoing basis.
This is, I mean, so important. It's how we expand the conversation, so we're not just talking to ourselves and, you know, while the GOP hardens its walls against both, I don't know, reality and the rest of us.
Yeah, they're doing their best to, you know, destroy the environment, the climate, and just about everything else that I think most Americans hold dear, right?
There are a lot of people who agree with you on the environment, and even agree with you on the importance of labor, but they don't want to be part of any political party. They're just down on political parties in general. Why are you a Democrat?
Well, historically, because my family has been, but in another sense, look, the Democratic Party is and has to be the party of clean energy solutions, clean air, safe water, a sustainable future. And we stand in stark contrast to the Republicans on so many issues. And I do understand from personal experience. I came into the party through the Bernie Sanders wing, right? I understand the feelings that some people have, but this is it, and everything is at stake. And this is our moment. And I also really so pleased to see some really significant work toward important party reforms. You know, there's a resolution that the newish chair, Ken Martin, he's elected back end of January. But
we like Ken, Minnesota, right around the corner. Also Great Lakes.
That's right.
Yep.
Yes, and who cares deeply about climate and environment, by the way. He's been a longtime supporter of the work we do at the council, for which I'm really grateful. But he's brought a resolution that the DNC will be considering at our meeting next week, which will be in Minneapolis, to really restrict dark money. And especially in Democratic primaries, and so it will task a newly formed reform task force within the DNC with looking at how we can go about that. And I think that is so important. Anyway, we all know the terrible effects that dark money has had and is having on Democratic Party politics. And in particular, when we look at what's happening with the environment and climate, you know, the fossil fuel industry donates huge amounts of money, and they often get what they want. You know, Trump asked for $1 billion donation and from them and from the oil and gas CEOs. And I think, you know, that paid off really, really well for them. They've gotten $18 billion annually in additional tax breaks and subsidies from the Trump administration's recent bill, on top of the existing tens of billions of dollars of subsidies. Some of those have been going on for 100 years. So whenever I hear someone complain about the little bit of subsidies given to solar and wind, I'm like, So I do think that is something we should, as a party, and certainly the Climate Council, be calling Trump out on the hypocrisy of that. Yeah.
Yep. Well, listen, we've run up against our clock here. I think this is so interesting. I think your personal journey is interesting. I'm grateful for it. The work that you do, the transformation of the Democratic Party and its structure, but also you're helping us understand what it is. And at the end of the day, right, it's us. We have to, it's not Ken Martin, it's not you, it's all of those people who are supporting it and trying to find a way together to move this country.
Absolutely. And, the history of the struggle for progress, it's never been a straight line, but we've done this before. We've dug our party out of holes previously, and we're going to do it again. I thank you so much for having me on the program.
Thank you, Michelle. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Take care.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break, and the fabulous Chris Geithner joins us when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, welcome back, and please welcome back Chris Geithner, author of Law Dork and the indefatigable chronicler and explainer of the judiciary to us. Chris's work, as I've told you before, is so important to our time that you simply must subscribe to Law Dork on Substack and follow him on social media. Chris, welcome back, and welcome back to the country. I understand you were overseas. You were in Scotland.
Yes, I was.
Well, welcome back. I'm afraid we didn't fix it while you were gone.
No, certainly not.
Can we start with the strong-armed takeover of our nation's capital? The president and his attorney general claim that the police department in D.C. is now under their control. The city didn't think so, and they went to court, and the court said, yeah, not really. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to push back a little bit. I really don't like people using the phrase takeover or control.
Take over the police department.
I don't like that because that's not what it is. I mean,
I agree with you. That's their language.
That's what far too many media reports and even Democrats talking about it are referring to it as. And I'm afraid that's exactly what Trump wants us to be saying about it.
Well, so
and the
straighten this out.
And it was great to have it in court yesterday before Judge Reyes is like this is a law that does give significant power to the executive, but it's not the power that they're claiming. What it is a law that basically says that for up to 30 days, if the president informs Congress, which he did, the president is allowed, because D.C. is not a state, under the Home Rule Act that controls D.C.'s government, the president is allowed to direct the mayor to give him the services of the police department that he decides are necessary for federal purposes in light of the emergency that he has declared. So while that is a lot more than he could do with, say, the Chicago police or the New York police, it is not a takeover of the department. It is the ability for him to say what he said, that there's this emergency, and yesterday's hearing didn't get into questions of whether or not he had legitimately declared an emergency, because it was the lawsuit was filed Friday morning and the hearing was 2 p.m. Friday, and the question of whether or not he properly invoked an emergency is going to be much more of a constitutional, legal briefing sort of issue. And so Judge Reyes, I think, smartly was like, if we're going to get any ruling today, any change today, we need to just for the purposes of today's arguments, let's just assume he's right on that. And let's just assume that he's right on the federal purposes that he claims. But where the arguments got into yesterday was on Thursday night, Attorney General Bondi issued this order that purported to do two big things, both of which the administration backed down from yesterday. The first one was claiming that the DEA administrator, who Trump had said on Monday when he invoked this power, was going to be like his man in charge, that A.G. Bondi said that he was going to be the emergency police commissioner. And then the other thing that she said in this Thursday night order was that she was rescinding and suspending certain Metropolitan Police Department, which is D.C.'s police force, certain MPD orders. And D.C. Friday morning, A.G. Brian Schaub, backed up by Mayor Bowser, went to court and said, no, you've gone too far. Right. And they got into court, and the pretty senior person in the Bondi Justice Department, Yakov Roth, who had only started in the department under the new Trump administration, came over from Jones Day, had been the acting head of the civil division of the Justice Department at certain points early in the administration. He was the guy in court, so this was pretty much as close to having Bondi in court as you could have, and he pretty much had to quickly back off on both of those points because Judge Reyes was like, "That where in the law do you think you have that power?" And aside from one sort of opening salvo where he basically tried to say that this was completely unreviewable once he had invoked the power, once Trump had invoked the power, there was no court review allowed, which she sort of was like, well, obviously that's not going to fly. Once that argument was out of the way, he really had to get into a negotiation standpoint, and after we took it was one of those, the judge asked for a 15-minute break and was like, this is basically a bathroom break, but I'm encouraging the lawyers for DC and DOJ to sort of come up with a solution so that we don't need to actually issue a temporary restraining order here. Yep. And she essentially said that that would be to your benefit, DOJ, because you're not going to like what I do. Yep. And we then went on a more than an hour and a half break. And so as time went on, we sort of knew this wasn't just him sort of hemming and hawing, but he was actually getting approval for stuff. He was going up the line. And by the time they came back, he said, as close as we've seen from the Trump administration, he basically said, we're going to start over with the order. He said, we get it. Bondi's order was insufficient, and we're going to redraft it in light of what you've said, and in light of the limits. And around 6 p.m., 7 p.m. yesterday, we got a new order, and all of a sudden, the whole element of trying to claim some emergency police commissioner was gone altogether. And it just said that he was basically the point person for the administration. And so DC is still in charge of its own police force. But unfortunately, because DC isn't a state and because this law does give significant power to the Trump administration, essentially they reworded all of the other sections to actually fit what the law says, and said that the AG and DEA administrator who had been authorized by the president to make these requests. We're requesting the services of the administration, directing the mayor to give the Metropolitan Police Department services in immigration enforcement. And what they said is that they wanted that help notwithstanding any D.C. laws or policies to the contrary.
Yeah.
And what that
hold on one second, Chris. Hang on one second.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of static on the line. Paul, do you hear that? Okay. Try again, Chris.
Is that better?
So much better.
Okay. It essentially what they said is that because this federal law allowing the president to direct for the services, it essentially allows for him to use those people as he wishes for federal purposes. And because of that, DC's sanctuary city policies, DC's implementation of those policies need to apply. And so this new order essentially says we want the DC's police to be able to be used by the federal government during this 30-day period, and we want you to help with immigration enforcement, and DC's attempts to restrict that cooperation do not apply for any officers called up for that or those purposes during this 30-day period. And
thanks.
Reyes, go along?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Reyes was not. DC was trying to argue that the restrictions, the ability of the president to call up these people, that they would still have to follow DC's policies. And Reyes, I think, correctly, in light of the courts above her, was like that's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
We're not going to claim that DC policies are superior to a federal law that says the president can request the use of these.
Right. So I mean, I'm comforted in the fact that Pam Bondi made an effort that was beyond the scope of what she was allowed to do in the law, ordered to do so in an executive order, that the judge said, yes, you don't have the power to do that. Here's what you do have the power to do. And they're back doing something that is, even if I don't like it, legal. But if they'd gotten away with it, Chris, I would have seen them try and do that in Chicago and other places.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And that's why I do think it was very important right away Thursday night, both the mayor and AG issued statements. The AG had out an opinion within hours saying that this went too far. The mayor quickly backed that up and posted the Attorney General's opinion as well as a statement backing that opinion. And clearly lawyers were up overnight ready to file the lawsuit right away Friday morning. And I think that was very important for D.C., that was very important for home rule, that was very important for the people who are being swept up in this sort of authoritarian effort, and it was very important, as you said, for the broader project of the administration to sort of normalize this, and as Rolling Stone reported, there's clearly an effort, at least by in Trump's mind, to make what happened in D.C. and L.A. Sort of the norm.
Yeah, and I don't think we're done understanding what he's going to do with the National Guard.
No, and
I think that's only going to get worse.
There was a Wall Street Journal report out this afternoon that they are expecting an order that the National Guard will actually carry weapons in D.C., which they had said originally they were not going to be doing, that they would have weapons like in their vehicles but wouldn't carry them with them. And while that can seem like sort of a side issue, since obviously other officers have weapons, I think a lot of people have correctly said that it's important to be fighting back very, very strongly against any effort to normalize military members having weapons in American cities.
It's escalation and provocation. They're going to push that Posse Comitatus Act to its brink. And Chris will kill.
There are difficulties that because the president is actually in charge of the D.C. National Guard, the mayor is not.
Yes.
Like the governors are in charge
it's not
of
a state,
the
right.
National Guard in their states. You're not. D.C. does not have, even though it hasn't led to any final rulings. D.C. doesn't have the powers even that Gavin Newsom is fighting for in California.
Right. Well, I mean, this is not a question of law, but national governors are not trained as police.
Well, it's both, and I think that's my point. Is
yes.
it is important that we fight both the efforts to escalate and change norms and change perceptions, which are clearly the intention of these, but also very, very plainly describe what the legal authority is and what's actually happening, and challenge it when they go too far. Because I think it's very important to, every time you talk about what's happening in D.C., say that it's only possible because D.C. is not a state. It's only, this is not authorized in any city.
Yep. So Chris,
other than Washington, D.C. It's not even authorized in territories. They have more powers than D.C.
Wow. So while we're talking about fighting back, there are heroes in the federal courts, and you wrote about one. Will you tell everybody about Karen Henderson? I mean, unfortunately,
I think that she read my story and had to go the other direction later in the week. But
yeah, I know.
I will. I mean, what I talked about is that Karen Henderson is a long-time D.C. Circuit judge. She's the longest serving active judge on that court, and she has. She's a big conservative. I mean, she has some rulings that you and I would just be appalled by, and has backed not just conservative legal stories, but also Trump legal stories over time. But she also has had a handful of significant moments where she has essentially stood up for the separation of powers, stood up for the division of government within our Constitution. And the most notable scenario that we all first sort of in this modern iteration of Henderson came in contact with her was she was one of the judges on the immunity ruling at the D.C. Circuit who upheld Judge Chutkan's ruling that Trump lacked immunity in the Jack Smith prosecution, the ruling that eventually was overturned by the Supreme Court. So we had that back before Trump was in office, but she was one of the judges who heard the first challenge to Trump's Alien Enemies Act proclamation, and she kept. She essentially has stood up for the other branches, and in the Alien Enemies Act case, she was saying like, no. The Trump administration is arguing we can't even review this, and that's wrong. We have an obligation to do so. And then more recently, the Trump administration decided to just take down this website that Congress passed a law saying that they have to have that has to do with where's
the money? Yeah.
Where appropriations are going.
Yeah.
And she essentially said, like, no, you do not have the ability to do that. You gave no reason for that. She went all the way back to the Stuart monarchs and fights over the executive, at that point, literally the monarchs, versus the legislature over who has the power of the purse, which you might recognize that phrase from the Federalist Papers. This is like the most fundamental understanding of what separation of powers mean. Is that Congress, the legislative branch, has the power to make spending decisions and to authorize how public monies are spent and how the executive has to make that spending, whether they have adhered to those spending requirements public. And she essentially said, this needs to happen, and at one point said, no Congress should be made to wait while the executive intrudes on its plenary power over appropriations and the disclosure thereof.
I love that.
Plenary power, so you understand. Yeah. Where you most often hear that is when we're talking about the president's power over, like, foreign policy in immigration. Like, that's like the most commonly used court ruling where you hear plenary power. But this was a time where she used it not about the executive, not about the judiciary, but in defense of the legislature, because they're not standing up for themselves. And unfortunately, a few days later, and what I sort of led off with here, is that she was a part of a 2-1 majority that sort of defanged that weekend ruling, which was over this website, by then actually addressing one of these impoundment cases about the Trump administration not spending the money that Congress said it was to spend. And this was over in the foreign aid case, the sort of USAID and State Department funding freeze. That was sort of one of the original cases of this new Trump administration. We finally got an appeals court ruling on the preliminary injunction, and there she said Congress, she sort of made the administration's arguments for them because they failed to make arguments for what she ultimately said was Congress passed this law called the Impoundment Control Act, and it sets forth what is to happen if there is an impoundment issue. And so because there is a law that sets forth the process, these organizations can't bring a constitutional claim because Congress has already set forth the statutory process for it. I think she's wrong on both points, and there's a really good dissent you should read. But I do want to sort of, I don't want to give Karen Henderson too much credit right now because she pulled back literally days after it published.
I'm sorry to hear that. But Chris, all over the federal judiciary, we are seeing people try and hold the line.
Up to Judge Reyes after 5 p.m. on Friday in this case over D.C.
So I guess in the time we have left, a while back, I don't know, you and I were talking, and it was months ago, and I may have jumped the gun because I said I didn't think the rule of law was holding and that this administration was hostile to it. And you corrected me, saying as far as you could see, the administration was following court orders, even if reluctantly. Since then, things have gotten a little worse. And you wrote, Chief Justice Roberts made clear that he and his brand of conservative justice is a little different from the masked ICE agents terrorizing neighborhoods, courtrooms, and metro stops. With that in mind, like, where are we today? Is the rule of law still on solid ground? Just step back and tell me what you think about this moment.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a dangerous moment. We have probably known that since the immunity ruling. But I think in terms of the Trump administration itself, I think the most dangerous sign came down when the D.C. Circuit, another panel held that Chief Judge Boasberg's contempt investigation was not authorized. And that is very disconcerting. It is a sign that the effort of courts to hold the Trump administration accountable in the one instance in which we sort of had these two instances where there was the most clear possibility of a failure to follow a court order between the March 15th flights and the Abrego Garcia case. And ultimately, whatever they might have done in the Abrego Garcia case with sort of this criminal indictment, which is truly troubling, but they did bring him back. Like they knew that they eventually were going to have to do something. And even ultimately, I mean, however ridiculously they've resolved the AEA by getting these AEA people out of the CCOT prison through a transfer, whatever, with Venezuela, like the administration does seem to know when they have screwed up. And this one instance that we really had solid evidence, solid information, especially with the whistleblowers' disclosures of these emails and text messages, and Judge Boasberg was really on his way to moving forward. The D.C. Circuit sort of held that in limbo for months, and then came out with this ruling that put it on ice. It is really concerning.
Will that ruling go to a whole on-bank review?
I really hope it does. I am going to be very concerned if it doesn't. You've got. I mean, so my three biggest concerns are the use of the shadow docket over the summer to really ultimately change the course of law, which is what I had written about in the July 24th piece. Yes. The failure at this point to allow a district court judge to use his constitutional authority to conduct a criminal contempt investigation, because we hadn't even reached a final order, which was a big part of the
which is the investigation here.
And then I am really concerned by the fact that there has not been a successful effort to stop the use of masks by immigration agents. I think that is a adds an element of lawlessness to the front end of this system that I think can quickly it literally masks accountability, and I think the fact that I sort of do combine those two things or compare those two things in the July 24th piece is not accidental. I think that when we are dealing with questions about whether the rule of law is holding, it is all the more important that every action every action be taken by an individual who can later be held accountable if and when appropriate, possible, and necessary. And any effort to make that not possible, and any effort in the case of restricting Judge Boasberg's ability to move forward, any efforts to stop accountability or mask the ability to obtain accountability is the sort of scenario that most concerns me about whether the rule of law is holding.
Thank you, Chris. We've run out of time, but that very helpful, and I'm going to think about those three things between now and when we next talk.
Thank you, Edwin.
All right, everybody follow Chris Geidner if you want to know what's going on in America's judiciary. It's just enormously important. Thanks, Chris. We will talk soon.
Bye-bye.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a break for the news and then talk Texas when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, I promised you we would go to Texas, but I'm wrong. Because my next guest we can't find him. So instead, what I'm going to do is play you an interview that I did yesterday. Former Congressman Joe Walsh, I think we just did a promo about him when he was with Joan. He and I regularly get together on Substack Live to talk about the week's news. We have a lot of fun. I think you'll like this. The version you're going to hear has been slightly edited because, my initial introductions of, again, former Congressman Joe Walsh and myself, they were tailored for Substack Live and not this radio show. But that's not all. Look, that's not radio. This is radio. And it might be that a word or two, we let slip that is permitted there, but is absolutely not allowed on the radio. You know what I'm talking about. Sometimes in describing our politics, that happens. So if you hear a little bit of that, that's just what that is. Anyway, I hope you like it. If you do like it, sign up for my Substack community, which is It's the Democracy Stupid on Substack, and you'll get notified when we do the next one. And frequently, I put the opens of my shows there. So I want to play that for you now, and we'll come back when it's over.
Hello, everybody. Hello there. This is one point I wanted to make, Mr. Scholar. Gerrymandering sucks, but the rules have always been that you do it every 10 years, at the end of every decade with a census. Those have been the rules of the game. I'm amazed by the people who don't understand how unprecedented it is what Texas is doing because they're trying to do it mid-decade. Like they don't want to wait till the end of the decade.
No, that's absolutely right. And I mean, just from a due process point of view, mid-decade means the census data isn't that valid anymore.
Yes.
It's data that was collected 6 years ago, and people moved. So there are all kinds of reasons. The first one that you mentioned before we got cut off, which is that people will be shifted from one district to the next and not know who represents them. The problem with gerrymandering generally, which that it takes away everybody's votes, and Texas' idea that, to hell with the voters, we can just do this whenever we want to maximize our political leverage, which is obscene. But you know what? California raised them back, and I think it's fun that we Democrats have decided to fight.
Well, I think it's great. Look, I wish everybody would stand down. I wish Texas would stand down. I wish we would stay at the end of every decade, we redistrict. But you're right, my friend. If Texas is going to go forward with this, I like Newsom coming out yesterday and saying, now, our listeners need to be aware that California is not a sure thing. Gavin Newsom is calling a special session for November. Right. They got to change their state constitution. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, Edwin, came out today and said, over my dead body, because he wants the commission to remain out there.
Yeah, Arnold's right on the merits. He's wrong on the politics.
Boom.
So this is where we are. It's a battle. And you want to say remember, California gave Donald Trump more Republican votes than any state but Texas. There are a lot of Republicans in California. And what Gavin Newsom didn't say, which I wish he did say, I don't want press conference, but I wish he had added, to all of the Republicans in my state, I am about to disenfranchise you so your votes don't count. And if you don't like it, call Texas.
We believe in good government, but when someone is burning your house of democracy down, you don't worry about good government right now. Right?
It goes away completely if we lose this fight. Your former party has made it clear that they are not interested in democracy anymore. And if they stay in power, we won't have one.
I've always been a little wishy-washy on Gavin Newsom because I really don't know who he is. Yep. But Trump's put a gift in his lap by taking all those troops out to L.A. So Gavin now is displaying a lot of fight. But that's what we need. That's what we Democrats need right now. I love the one thing he said yesterday that I loved, Edwin, was when he said, Trump doesn't play by the rules. Any rules. So if you're going to fight someone like that, I'm sorry, you got to get dirty. You got to do the same.
I'm loving his social media where he's just trolling the Trump stuff and the all caps. And it's fake. My governor here in Illinois is fighting back. Kathy Hochul in New York is fighting back. These are big states with a lot of people. So and you know what? All of this is a sign that the GOP knows it isn't going to win the midterms.
True, because remember how this all started. Trump got on that phone and called Governor Abbott and said, find me 5 more Republicans.
Right.
Just like that call he made to the Georgia Secretary of State after the 2020. Stop. It started with Trump. But again, I'll make my plea. I hope Texas stands down. Because again, Edwin, if we normalize mid-decade redistricting, then it will be every 2-year redistricting.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And then I think representative democracy's over.
Will be gone. Yeah, it's terrible. And people should remember this. H.R. 1, when Joe Biden first won and Nancy Pelosi pushed it through, the House passed a bill that would make all this illegal.
Yeah.
All of it illegal. And it couldn't break the filibuster in the Senate. Two former Democrats, Manchin and Sinema, and all the Republicans together filibustered it, and they and John Roberts are why we're here.
I can tell you this, to close on this one, though, there are a lot of Republicans in other states working Abbott and Texas Republicans hard not to do this for their own reasons. But let's hope they can maybe prevail.
I hope so. It's not really in Texas's character, in Abbott's character, to back down. So, you know what? We'll just push him down if that's what it takes.
Fight. I became a Democrat 2 months ago, Edwin, if for no other reason than to help show Democrats how to fight. You've been preaching about this for a while.
I like to fight, Joe. I like to get along with people, but when they do the wrong thing or they're trying to take away stuff from voters, you got to fight.
You have to fight.
Yeah.
And, you've been a Democrat longer than I have. I always worried when I was a Republican, I believed Democrats would never really fight politically to the death. Most of my former Republican colleagues believe that.
Yeah. Well, we certainly have had a moment. I mean, Bill Clinton was a tough fighter.
Yeah.
He was a tough fighter. But we had a moment. And again, I don't know. I think we talked about this before. The things I would have liked Barack Obama to have done, but I can't imagine the constraints on his presidency. And Joe, I like what he accomplished, but he was too old for the politics. Too old for the politics.
And in the meantime, my friend, the President of the United States invited a war criminal onto American soil today.
And, without doing the background work that has to be done, either to sell out Ukraine now or to sell it out later, I think is the only way to look at this. But, they've got some show cooked up for us. And, I'm sure we'll see it and it'll get a couple of days news. He doesn't want to come back to Washington and have Epstein be back in the news.
Right.
He'd sell out a whole country in order not to have that happen.
He would do anything to get that off the front pages. I just saw one piece of news about 30 minutes ago. There will no longer be a one-on-one meeting between Trump and Putin. They'll now each have two other people besides the translators in the room. I think Rubio will be in the room, but I get so nervous with the thought of Trump alone with Putin.
Well, you know what? This is where the Republicans got to be held accountable, right? They were a party that once understood who Putin was, once understood that it mattered to stand up for borders and security and democracy around the world. And any sellout to Putin, if it doesn't lead to a rebellion amongst Republicans in Congress, then you know what? Then they stand for nothing at all.
And by the way, that was Rubio just 3 years ago. Rubio, we would have called a hawk on Russia. But now he's Trump's secretary.
Rubio, Lindsey Graham, you name them all. They were there.
Yeah. It really is interesting. My former party is utterly different than what it was.
Yeah, you didn't leave. They left you.
Do you ever remember the Democratic Party even coming close to that kind of transformation?
No, if you look at the Democratic presidents for 50 years, there's an evolution, but they're recognizably the same. There is nothing. W was radically different than Nixon, and this guy's radically different. So your party has been like with a rocket underneath it, like leaving exit velocity of planet Earth.
Yeah, and I did a Substack Live a couple weeks ago with John Tester, a former Democrat.
I love John Tester.
I love that.
He's a great guy.
He's a hell of a guy. Yeah. And he told me, he said, look, Joe, I'm glad you're a Democrat now. Welcome. But you'll go back to being a Republican once they get normal again. And I shook my head and said, it ain't going to happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, and I will never. But I don't see that happening in
I don't see it happening.
You?
I know. They've wedded themselves to they're a danger to our democracy. Whatever this group is that doesn't believe in democracy captured one of our two political parties.
Yes.
And it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But I think right now they are vulnerable. And I tried to make a list of the things they're vulnerable on right now, but it's everything. I mean,
it's everything.
Inflation is up. Epstein's still in the news. Musk and his I don't pay taxes, but I'm getting government money is in the news. The gerrymanders people don't like. The oh my God, we're not going to think about climate change anymore. They don't like the giveaways to the billionaires. They don't like. I mean, the idea that the big beautiful bill meant that the extra tariff money that you and I are paying basically meant that Jeff Bezos's wedding was free to Jeff Bezos because we gave that Venice party back to him afterwards. That's just disgusting, and Americans know it's disgusting. So Democrats may be new to a fight, but oh my God, they could fight wherever they want this time.
Trump's numbers are horrible.
And they're not going to get better.
Right. Now, Democratic numbers are bad too, but Trump's numbers are horrible. And this chasm between the price of everything is going to keep going up and job growth is going to keep going down. He can't get away from that.
You cannot get away from it. He absolutely can't. He didn't even want to talk about Epstein at some point because reality is going to be so bad for him.
I mean,
that's actually a really good point.
I mean, we can't. Democratic numbers, I agree with you, are down, but that's because the party itself has not defended itself for years, and people have a negative feeling of it. But candidate numbers aren't so bad. So when individual candidates are out there and they're up against Trump, or Musk shows up like he did in the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, Democrats are going to do okay if they can fight.
And I don't know if you and I talked about this last week, but I saw this Hakeem Jeffries on this morning, and he was asked just point blank, "Are you endorsing Mamdani?" And he wouldn't. I just think that's stupid, gutless, and wrong. And I think the party establishment, the only thing that could up 2026 for Democrats is if the party establishment doesn't listen to their voters.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm less worried about it because in the Democratic Party, the establishment is also less relevant than it is in the Republican Party.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It doesn't make the key decisions. They bubble up from people want to know who's our candidate going to be. Who can lead us? It's too early. We'll figure it out. The voters are going to tell us through primary, and that's okay.
But we embrace all. Mamdani and I disagree on a whole bunch. So what? He's the nominee. I endorse him. I mean, it's not hard.
Me too. It's not hard. It's not hard. And I don't pretend to understand the ins and outs of New York's miserable politics, but I can't imagine that the Speaker of the House isn't endorsing a Democrat. I won the Democratic primary.
Look, I am off the charts pro-Israel, and whenever I bring up Israel, I get a lot of flack from a lot of my new Democratic followers. Yeah. But I still endorse Mamdani. I think with Hakeem Jeffries and a lot of the party leaders, they're afraid to with the Israel thing, AIPAC and the rest. They got to get over that.
Yeah, it's that. It's the socialist tag. Look, my mayor in Chicago has not, he's got a 26% approval rating right now, and he's sort of had that same kind of rhetoric. So people are nervous about that. But it's his performance, not his politics, that's been a problem. And I don't think Mamdani, he may or may not be successful doing what he wants to do in New York and helping New York. So I don't know whether it's the Israel stuff or the socialist stuff. But either way, he won the primary. Let's go with it.
One of our listeners, Bob B., just said that Ken Martin, the head of the DNC, endorsed Mamdani. Good.
Yep.
Hey, Edwin, now that I got you here, Mr. Chicago, yours, the mayor, you probably, I know it's early, but do you anticipate a pretty big old fight for that position in 27?
Yeah. I mean, we might as well have an open mayor's seat because nobody was. If you have nobody in it, it polls at 26%. So sure, it's an open seat in a way.
A bunch of candidates will get in.
Look, if I were 10 years younger, Joe, I'd do it. But I'm not 10 years younger.
Oh, that's what I was hoping you were going to say. Because I don't give a damn if you were 10 years younger. I'd like you to do it now.
No. You know what? The fight I'm in is the one you and I are talking about for the whole country right now. And
good point.
And, and that's one we got to win. And it impacts our, my city, every city. We got to win this fight.
I agree.
Chicago is a great, great city, and it's in trouble. Its government is in trouble. The city itself is strong enough to survive poor government, and it has.
And it has. Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
What is your biggest fear coming out of Alaska?
You know what? I've gone back and forth on this because he's such a showman, Joe. I don't know whether he's going to cave to Putin or whether he's going to pretend he's going to open the meeting, say, you're not interested in peace, slam the table and go home and pretend to be tough on Putin. Either way, I don't trust him.
No, you can't.
Right? Whatever the real deal is between them, we're not going to know.
Oh, my God, that's so frightening, but that's true. I mean, we're talking about a guy who still thinks he won the 2020 election. He fired a guy because of the jobs numbers. He told the Smithsonian last week that he's going to redo the history with
consistent with his beliefs, yeah, you can't believe a thing he says.
Not a thing. Not a thing. But right now, I like where we are. I mean, I don't like where we are as a country, for sure. But politically, I like where we are because, again, the Republicans are trapped with this terrible president who is driving his popularity down, doing things that are such bad policy. They're hurting people faster than anybody could have imagined. I mean, the big, beautiful bill supposedly delayed some of the worst stuff to get around this next election cycle. And it isn't mattering because the tariffs are jacking things up, and so seem to be holding,
So because he's in trouble, look what he did at the beginning of this week. Crime, D.C., I'm going to take over D.C. He's doing what I would do sometimes when in my old days. Yeah. We Republicans would grab onto that issue of crime because we knew it was a good issue for us, and the Democrats were weak on it. Yeah. And so Trump's throwing that out there now.
It's not helping him, I don't think. I mean, he's like D.C. is actually, pretty safe right now. Every city has some crime problems, no question, and we can do better in every city, no question. Not the way he's doing it, I mean, he's going to get people killed, but if he wants to be a mayor, God bless him. He should go try and be a mayor and leave the rest of us alone. I'll let him be the mayor of D.C. Just move out of that White House and you go ahead, take that job. See how well you do.
He wants to be a king. He wants to be a tyrant. And I just thank God he's as old as he is, because if he were 10 years younger, I think he'd be dead serious. I'm running for a third term no matter what.
Yeah, I know.
He still may try to.
Well, he can't win that if he doesn't fix the elections, right? Americans aren't going there. And we do have to protect the midterms, and they are coming after him. And we do have to worry about his armed thugs and ICE.
Yes.
That group is getting bigger. Hopefully, if we win back Congress, we will just take the money from them. That you can't hire anybody. I mean, there are things you can do with just the House, as you know.
Yeah. No, the House can do a lot. And that's why everybody asks me all the time, what can I do? What can I do, Joe? And I know it's hard, but 2026, a year and a half from now, is everything. And making certain the Democrats take back the House. The Senate's going to be tougher, but take back the House.
Take back the House. Take back the House. And then that House will take back the purse. And that's right. That'll be they'll stand up for their prerogative.
Take back the purse and reinstate oversight. And begin immediately investigating everything he's done, which they haven't done from the beginning.
Right. And they can, I mean, it isn't even that hard. It's going to be just a joy, I think, to be able to say, look, America, here are the facts. Here are the facts. But the one thing that I wish we got better in is taking the narrative from.
Yeah.
We wait and we react. We wait and there's plenty to react to. I mean, but we could actually go out every week, have Democrats have a press conference and go on the offensive every week. And there's plenty to do. You do it. I do it.
You said it. Go on the offensive. Yeah. Stay on the offensive. Never get off of the offensive.
Yeah.
And it's just there is a dearth of, I've found in my new party, a dearth of Democrats who just look at the camera and just fucking talk like regular people. And I think voters want to see that. Yeah. And we need more of that.
They're all over the country. They're just not in D.C. I mean,
yes.
We got mayors who do it. We got governors who do it.
Amen.
Right. We got state legislators who are awesome. What it takes to get elected to Congress and the Senate tends to push people into a world of political consultants who do not help.
Yes. Well, and that's a really great thing, Edwin, for everybody listening to understand. I think the leading voices, as you just said, in the party will come from outside of D.C.
Yeah, I think so, too. Governors, and they're just all over. There's a lot of talent. And there are a lot of people who really care about the democracy, who've thought about the policies. some who even can thread the needle between what you think should be done and what I think should be done, and do it well, and we cheer. We haven't. When's the last time we had a real rambunctious, wide open primary for president? I think when Joe ran the first time. Yeah. It was unclear until we got to South Carolina. Right. And then it got pretty clear pretty fast. But for a while, it was wide open. I think the party needs that. But again, that's off. I don't want people thinking about who's going to be the 28 nominee. Drop that. Let's take back the House right now. Defend. Take back the House. I agree. And we got to, this gerrymandering thing is part of it. I hope as I said, to end where we began, should never happen. But if it has to happen, we're going to say, okay, you want to raise that rifle, we'll raise it right back. But shouldn't happen. Texas to stand down. And we should beat them anyway. Amen, brother. That's the message. Yep. Texas, stand down. No mid-decade redistricting. But if they do it, hell yeah, we're coming too. All right, Joe. Listen, this is a great conversation. We will do it again, and then we'll do it again. Subscribe to both of us. Subscribe to Edwin Eisendrath. Everybody, subscribe to both. Thank you, my friend. Thank you, Joe. Terrific.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Look, we all know people who work overtime to shoehorn facts into already existing worldviews. Worldviews most people don't even recognize they're shaped by propaganda. And it's a great pleasure to find, people with tremendous curiosity and the capacity for letting facts reveal themselves. Andrea Pitzer is somebody like that. She's a journalist, a podcaster, an author of books that do not fit into categories. She has a knack for rediscovering moments that, captured everybody's attention, then faded. And she reminds us how gripping those moments were. One of her books is about a famous, forgotten, and then she rediscovered polar expedition where people got stuck in the ice. Another is about her newest, about the secret resistance of Vladimir Nabokov. That one got my attention for sure. And one of her first is a deep dive into the history of concentration camps, which is unhappily the topic that I want to talk to her about today. Andrea, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Edwin. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. I actually want to talk to you about Nabokov because, in part, he's the greatest writer I really dislike, but that has to take a back seat, I think, to the concentration camp questions right now. What Americans hear those words, and I think we're confused because, a couple generations have grown up on World War II stories, and so when they hear it, they think Auschwitz. Can you take some time to disentangle concentration camps from death camps? Talk a little bit about where they came from.
Sure. So I think, first of all, people kind of like, well, what is a concentration camp exactly? And so for the book that I wrote, which looked at it all over the globe for more than 100 years, I defined it as a mass civilian, so not POW camps, but mass civilian detention without any real trial. So if there was a trial, it was just a show trial or a big group, 100 people getting sentenced at once, something like that, done on the basis of race or ethnicity or religion or political party rather than actual crime that was committed. And it's almost always done to separate a targeted group from society, to remove them from society, and it's almost always also done to consolidate and build like political power. And we see a lot of that happening in the U.S. right now, but as you said, people think of Auschwitz when they think of that. And what a lot of people don't realize is that there was almost a decade of Nazi camps that existed before Auschwitz became a death camp. In fact, Auschwitz itself began as part of the regular Nazi concentration camp system. And that system in those opening years looked a lot like other systems that had existed over the prior 40 years around the world. Concentration camps were called that from the 1890s up, and they unfortunately unfortunately were not unusual. And so that's one of the reasons that even though people realized the Nazi camps were bad, they didn't realize how singularly bad they became during the war at first, because we had the Soviet Gulag. We'd had colonial detention around the world in these far-flung territories that led to genocide. So camps had a bad reputation, but Auschwitz and the death camps that were instituted in mid-World War II, really brought that annihilation and that removal from society into actually death factories and eradicating people. But part of the reason for writing my book was that those camps didn't all vanish after 1945 around the world, and we are seeing them play out now in the U.S., and without knowing that there are things short of Auschwitz that are still horrific and dangerous and can put us on that same path, I think people don't know that we might be repeating that history ourselves.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, civilian detention without due process is what these things, as you say, it's a great definition. And I think that they would have existed throughout human history if they could have, but I guess it requires some modern weaponry for a few people to be able to incarcerate so many.
Yes, so it was certainly we can look back on things like Spanish treatment of Native Americans in North and South America for centuries, British treatment, U.S. treatment, British treatment of colonial subjects. These kinds of camps had precursors. You think most Americans have probably heard of Trail of Tears, for instance, this mass relocation and closing people off. So it isn't as if people who are trying to sort of, in grim and dangerous ways, get power haven't tried to do these kinds of things. But it wasn't until the second half of the 19th century when you have the patenting and mass production of both barbed wire and automatic weapons that, as you said, you can end up with a small guard force capable of holding a lot of people. And that is where you I compare it to going from like the atomic bomb to the H-bomb, right? You've sort of supercharged this idea of relocation and detention that existed before, but it's now much more lethal.
So starting in the 19th century, we have this, what would be recognized today as a concentration camp, this notion of civilians that are, for one reason or another, not favored by the government, removed from society without what we would recognize as due process. That sure sounds a lot like what we're going through, and I'm afraid what Congress just put $170 billion towards creating throughout the United States.
Well, that is one of the reasons I'm really trying to get the word out now. My book came out, and to be clear for any listeners that are out there, when I pitched this book, it was over a decade ago. When I started researching and writing it, Obama was president. So I was concerned about these long-term trends, before Trump came on the scene, because we had these issues with the war on terror and Guantanamo, and some of these seeds I felt had been planted in really dangerous ways and weren't getting taken care of. And so I think there is some sharing of responsibility for us being where we are between Republicans and Democrats. But that said, the Trump administration, the first time out and now, are really, flooring the accelerator. And so with the budgetary allotment that you were just describing, it's an exponential growth of ICE, which what we're seeing happen right now is what's been done with prior funds, right? So what's going to be done is going to be several times more. And just for perspective, if people aren't aware, the U.S. prison system is also not a great system, and it is potential that ICE detention will surpass U.S. Federal Bureau of Prison Detention. That's how much money that we're giving them. And it is likely to become the largest law enforcement agency in the country. And its agents right now are effectively on the streets masked, doing sweeps, disappearing some people that we haven't been able to find, although eventually we've been able to find most of them. Some people, the gay hairdresser, Andre, for those who followed the story of him being sent to El Salvador, we still have not been able to find what happened to him. So you have a masked police force disappearing people off the streets with very little accountability to existing law. We are definitely repeating this history, and we are arming the people with a lot of money for future worse things.
Help me understand the connection between the use of these camps. The government decides they need to remove a whole bunch of people without trial, without just because they want to do it, and they can. And you said that it's also used to consolidate power. How are those two ideas connected?
So one of the things, the reason I was talking about, that I started working on this a decade ago, is that sometimes people just want to look at Nazi camps or the Soviet Gulag and not sort of think about their own country. But in truth, every time a system has evolved in the world, there's this international influence and history of these kinds of camps that definitely you can see evolve globally over time. But in each case, it's really dependent on local culture inside each country. Who is the targeted group, and what are the sort of levers of hate and fear that you can be flipping to motivate people? And in the U.S., we have had a really strong anti-immigrant strain that has emerged again and again, even as it subsides sometimes, but for over a century. Thinking of how we denied citizenship to Asian and especially to Chinese Americans at the end of the 19th century into the 20th, Japanese American detention in camps during World War II. We think about Operation Wetback, as it was called. It's a slur, but it was part of the name of the thing in the 50s. And people were held in camps in that before they were deported and deep into the Mexican desert, and many people died there. So it's this combination of the two. And where the power comes from, so there's always a group you can target if you use propaganda for long enough. But the power comes from the reason those people get targeted is because you can cow a population. Just speaking in very general numbers, about a quarter of any population tends to be deeply sympathetic to pretty authoritarian rule. And so those people are going to always be available to that kind of power grab. And then you're going to have a chunk of people who are never going to be interested in that. But there's a group in the middle. And the way you secure that group with political power, how you use political power to secure that group in the middle, is you terrify them, so you make them think they're under attack, and then you also create a setting in which stopping anything from happening is a really unpleasant experience for anybody that stands up. So you use fear, you use anger, you use manipulation, and you're looking for that tipping point that's enough people that you can either win an election, that you can browbeat people, that you can make it too difficult for resistance to happen. And this is one of the big dangers of this new budget, is that just to use another foreign example, let's say in 2016 in Russia, Vladimir Putin set up the Rosguardia, which was a national law enforcement force that answered directly to him, and it's the Russian National Guard technically, but they suppressed domestic protests. So they now have a police force of hundreds of thousands that is really tied to the president, and that is what has effectively kept internal dissidents from being able to grow and develop, in addition to the targeting of people like Navalny that rise up. And so in the U.S., what that looks like is if this roving police force becomes bigger and bigger, and we do see the president wanting to target birthright citizenship, already doing that today, threatening Rosie O'Donnell and revoking her citizenship. If citizenship becomes fungible, then it's not just about immigrants, right? It becomes about whoever the president doesn't like. And unfortunately, we do see border protection. We do see ICE, that there's a lot of allegiance to the president and his agenda right now. And so I think for that political power to sort of keep that from happening, we're going to have to be really watching this ICE force that's going to be growing exponentially in the coming months.
So if I understand you, if the president wants to terrorize Americans into his corner, he has to say about the Walmart greeter that he's just arrested, to the guys picking strawberries in a field that he has just put in a camp. He has to say about all of them, I'm going after rapists and child murderers, and people are coming after your kids, which is what he's saying, even though it has no relation to who he's arrested. Is that right?
Yes, and so what's fascinating, I don't know if you saw it, but just at the end of the week, a new Gallup poll came out, and because it's getting tough, because they're being so aggressive about it. We see language from Stephen Miller that is incredibly aggressive about go to Home Depots, go to these places, round them up, 7-Elevens, why are you guys not arresting more? I mean, he's literally saying these things, and it's getting reported on. But more importantly, we see cameras where, the local news people are talking to the community whose ice cream vendor of 30 years was just swept away. And people are seeing what's actually going on. And literally, the end of the week, the result just came out that it's an all-time high of Americans saying that immigrants are good for the country. And it has been a radical switch, and the switch has been no more radical than in any category that they looked at than in the Republican camp, which literally, since Trump came to office, Republican support for immigration, for immigrants specifically, has jumped more than 20 points just in these 4 months. And I think that it's that exactly what you're just framing there. It's this gap between the Walmart greeter being the guy that's getting arrested and Trump saying it's rapists and criminals. And when people can see that difference, then they are less afraid and they are less going to buy into it. Now, again, that quarter or so of the population is going to remain very devoted to this kind of leadership because they want to see somebody punished. But the majority of Americans, there's a lot of Americans that are racist or afraid of foreigners, and it's easy to play on that, and that's true in a lot of cultures. I'm not just going to single out only America here, but they may not be racist and afraid of foreigners enough to buy what Trump is selling, because what they're selling is a really harsh recipe.
Yeah. So one area where we're beginning to see the gap is in his rhetoric over immigrants, right? And you still hear it from senators. I stood with a mother whose kid was murdered by an illegal, one of them will say. Okay, I'm in Chicago. There are plenty of murders, and they're not by immigrants. I mean, terrible things happen. And we need to arrest them.
And there are some that are committed by immigrants. If you have a population of over 10 million people, there's going to be some. But we literally have 100 years of statistics that show that immigrants, probably because they don't want to be arrested, actually commit fewer crimes than citizens and native-born people.
Right. So we have this gap between the facts and the rhetoric about immigrants. We are about to have another gap between Americans' sense of who they are and the reality of concentration camps in 50 states. I mean, this thing they built in Florida, which now has prisoners in it, is I think, repellent to most Americans.
And I think they've oversold it with the merch and, what they are calling it. I don't like to call it that, but they're calling it Alligator Alcatraz, and the Republican Party in Florida is selling this merchandise for it. And I think that, again, they're selling that to their base, but they're misestimating, in my opinion, how appealing that's going to be to everyday Americans. And we already have the first reports out from the Everglades detention, the concentration camp there, and it is saying that they don't have regular access to water, that they aren't being given the meds that they arrived with, if some of them have medical conditions, that there's flooding, that there's maggots in the food. I mean, this is not, this is not the kind of ship-shape camp that they're promoting it as by a long shot.
So we have an example. Kristi Noem goes down to El Salvador and has a fashion shoot in front of men detained in the CICOT prison. And the reaction to that across the great majority of America was disgust. And that was true of plenty of Republicans. They were just, that was a bridge too far. We're seeing this now start to play. Americans aren't going to want people in a prison that exists because a campaign donor of Ron DeSantis's got a contract to build a shoddy prison in the middle of a swamp. They're not going to like that.
No, I think they won't, and so it's really important for, I do different kinds of reporting and journalism as well as writing books, and it's really important, I think, to emphasize the money trail in all this, because it's a tremendously corrupt enterprise. Detention in America has long been one, and this kind of ad hoc, overnight stuff springing up is really rife for things like no-bid contracts and just really, really dangerous ways that will be terrible for the people detained, like in the conditions they're going to be detained in, and a boondoggle for friends of the administration. And nobody likes their tax dollars going to things where they feel like they're being ripped off. And so I feel like sometimes with Trump, everybody has such strong feelings about him that it's actually more effective to talk about what's happening on the ground than just, I hate Trump, I love Trump. Like people don't change their minds about that. But if you show them what's happening locally, if you have local journalists where they are still surviving, and God knows there's not nearly enough of them in the country anymore, but if you have local TV stations, if you have local community groups educating people on what detention is happening there and what is happening to their literal community if it becomes dependent on these kinds of operations, that's a really dangerous road to go down. And I think people will not want to do it. But we do already see plans. As you mentioned, Trump has said that he would like to see these all over the country. And we already see some solicitations coming out in the sort of government contract site where they list these things for detention, for instance, at Fort Bliss and some other places. So it's definitely those wheels are rolling, and I think that we probably need to be acting, in the next 6 to 8 months to try to put the brakes on as much of this as possible, because one of the things that concentration camp history shows us is once this stuff is entrenched, it takes on a momentum of its own that is sometimes far more than was imagined even by the people who sort of ushered it in and started it. And so we don't want to end up with a massive system of this kind that then is available to whoever comes after Trump.
So the reason I asked the questions the way I did is to sort of outline the areas where we can fight back. The gap between the reality and the rhetoric on immigration is one. The gap between our sense of who we are as Americans and the existence of these concentration camps is one. The American disgust with government corruption is a third. And you've just put a fourth on the table, which is, these things always expand. And you can expect if they do it that a year from now, that, with untrained people they're just giving bounties to fill the 10,000 hires, that they're going to be taking dissidents as well. And that also is going to run the wrong way. So these are the areas that I can think of. And if you have more, I'd love to hear them. But
I have a bunch more.
Every day.
Yeah, Go ahead. I know. I have concrete thoughts on what people need to do. So outside of the times where you have like a cult of personality figure die, say like Joseph Stalin, which really ushered in the end of the Soviet gulag in a lot of ways, or like the Nazi camps, which were ended by defeat in war. Outside of those kinds of situations, the things that have helped societies come back once they've had camp systems are to keep independent courts is the first thing. And about that, I would say I, as an outsider, and I don't report on the court, but I follow it closely, the Supreme Court seems to me to already be compromised and perhaps even corrupt in some ways. But it is still vital to have those lower court decisions, which overwhelmingly are standing for democracy and going against this sort of power grab that Trump is doing. And that gives tremendous moral authority to people that are standing against the administration itself. And so those are successful in slowing and stopping some things along the way. But even if they get quashed in the end, it is still a public record, and it gives tremendous moral force to the second part of how people get out of this, which is that protests are really critical. And I know some people think, that doesn't do anything, but in fact, it lets people network and find out who else is against the administration and who else is willing to take action. And the bigger they become, the more they start to feel like the winning side. But literally, they also, in 2020, there's been studies that have been done, and they found that the Black Lives Matter protests, there was a huge backlash against them right after they happened, but a few months later, they actually influenced the election in some important ways. And it was clear that where the protests had the most effect was actually in smaller communities, less educated communities, and whiter communities. And my theory, and this is just my own guess, so I want to be clear, this is not part of the researchers, is that those demonstrations, that those communities might either be totally checked out of politics, or they might only be listening to a really narrow band of information, and they literally didn't know the information that was put out through those protests. And so I think helping support legal aid groups that are doing stuff with the courts and communities and families that have been detained to keep the whole court system as vital as possible, and then also actually speaking up, educating people, and doing protests. Those are two really important ways in addition to the ones that you named.
I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk. Your work is, I know that you do podcasts. You've written about a lot of things, but this one has captured your time now because it's so important. And I'm so grateful to you for it's not your latest book, but you're sticking with it and focusing on it, in ways that are impactful.
I will be happy when it becomes completely irrelevant, but we're not there yet. We are not there yet for a while.
We're not. Now, is it true that you are actually licensed to carry a rifle in polar bear country?
I am, in the high Norwegian Arctic. I've been on 4 expeditions, and in 2023, I got certified to carry a rifle against polar bears in the high Norwegian Arctic.
I hope you've never had to use it.
No, that's the goal. The goal is to never actually shoot a bear. So.
Yeah, or get eaten by one.
Or get eaten also, yes. Also very important.
Yeah. Well, look, so you hang out in dangerous places, clearly, like the central, like the part of American democracy that is worried about concentration camps. Really, I'm proud that you joined us today. I'm very, very impressed with your work. And you know what? With your curiosity, which is unusual these days. I mean, you're definitely a polymath, and it's fun.
Well, thank you. And I just tell everybody else, don't wait for a guru to tell you what to do. If something looks wrong, find a way to move against it, because that's really what we're all going to have to do to get out of this.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. Really, really, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Edwin. Take care.
All right, everybody. Thank you for sticking with me today. I didn't take your calls, but that's not because I don't want to. We've had a few technical difficulties. We'll be back shipshape for you next week, and I look forward to hearing from you after another great week. Hang in there.